Well, you might have noticed this morning that Josh is not with us. He is out enjoying fall break with his family, and so we are glad that he is able to do that. I want to thank everybody, Angie and everybody else who stepped in and filled up the gaps that were left by his absence. There's always a number of technical issues that come up that we are not as knowledgeable in as he is. And so I thank everybody for all the work that they did this morning so that we might praise and worship God together. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes 3 today, if you'd like to turn there. We're going to talk, as we continue with our sermon series on generosity, we're going to talk about generosity and time, or generosity of our time. And this is an important aspect of generosity. When we talked about the fact that we were going to do this new sermon series on generosity, it might come to people's minds that what we're going to do is give a big push for giving. That's actually not what we're doing. It seemed to me, as I talked about last week, that this mark of a generous spirit and a generous person is something that is inherently attractive. It is an aspect of God, it is an aspect of who Jesus is, and it's a vital part of our lives as Christians. And so we want to look at what it means to be generous, not just in a sense of giving or financially, but in the sense of every aspect of our life. And so today we're going to be talking about generosity and time. Now, we might also suspect that because we're talking today about generosity and time, that what I'm going to tell you is that you need to be giving a whole bunch of your time here at our church to pull weeds and wipe runny noses at kids and do that kind of stuff. And that's actually not what I'm going to tell you today. Now, if you want to volunteer and do that, we're not going to say no. But that's not really what we're talking about today. We're talking about a view of time that is hopefully transformative. Because really it's not about taking on extra tasks. Because I don't know about you guys, but most times what I find is people today have kind of a love-hate relationship with their clocks. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just never enough time. We're so overcommitted. And so usually when you start talking about time and generosity with time, and especially if it's a sermon about that, the automatic thing that people experience is I really ought to be doing more. And there's a guilty feeling, but then there's also this feeling of kind of utter catastrophe about to happen because they just don't know where they would get more time, and they don't know how they would, they feel maybe guilty that they don't put time into where they should, but they don't know where they're going to find extra time. And so generally there's just the sense that in the approach to this topic is somewhat negative. And I don't want it to be that way today. I think that we want to approach this in a very positive nature because the Bible has great blessings for us in the area of time. So let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And this is an incredibly famous passage. If people who aren't Christians or never been a part of the church, this is one of those few passages that they'll know, and they know it because it's so popular. It's been a song and other things, but you usually will hear this at funerals and things like that, but there's more to it than that. So let's look at this. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 through 8. It says, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." There's probably more things that they could have said in that list, but I think you got the picture, right? So there's a lot of times, and there's time for everything. The question for us is, how do we know which time is which? Right? That's always the trouble, because if you're like me, then you find yourself doing things at the wrong times. Right? Especially that part where it says there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. Like, that's the hardest one to figure out, right? Is when should I say something and when should I not say something? If you have kids, they're adult kids, you think, oh my goodness, should I say something or should I not say something? So hopefully we can figure out this idea of generosity and time. And we're going to look at a few different aspects of how the Bible covers time. Not just in this passage, but overall. The first thing we're going to talk about is inhabiting time and space, because what we find is that the Bible is really interesting in the way that it deals with our lives. It deals with our lives in this knowledge that there's really two main aspects of how we orient ourselves in the world, and one is space and the other one is time, and the relationship between those two things is very interesting in Scripture. Then we're going to talk about walking with God, and then finally we're going to talk about doing the work, because one of the aspects of time is that there is a time to work. The Bible orients time in the idea of 7, right? There's 6 parts of that are for work, and the 7th one is for celebration. And so time is a big aspect of how we orient and situate ourselves. So let's first talk about inhabiting time and space. I think I'm not unique as I look at how my life has changed and how the world has changed. Do you guys remember being bored when you were younger? Anyone remember being bored? Going to your parents and saying, there's nothing to do? Those were the best times ever, weren't they? Don't you look back at that now and go, wow, weren't those great times? Because I think that a lot of us, as we've gotten older and as time has progressed and as technology has progressed, what we find is that there's this biblical idea that time devours space. And that's a weird thing to think about, but that's kind of the way it is. Time devours space. And you know that's true because you think about, like, if you were in Bible times, in Jesus' day, and you were, say, like I went out to see my kids in Texas. If I was going out to see my kids in Texas in Jesus' day, how long would that take? I would still be there, right? I'd probably still be on my way there. And now the thing is that space is like so nothing now. You can get around the world. You know, if you have somebody that you care about halfway around the world, that's nothing to get there. Nothing. The time between Jesus' day and our day, what's happened is space has been devoured. And what happens is that we don't know now space the way that we used to. When I was a kid, I remember I knew every inch of my town, at least the old part of my town. I'd explored that. I'd spent so much time there. I'd examined things. I knew where the coolest places for forts were. I knew where the trees with the best knots or holes in them to hide things were. I knew where all the cracks in the sidewalks were because, if you were on skates or on a skateboard, that would trip you up. And so I knew all of that. And now what happens is I don't know anything outside of my little area around my street. Why? Because I get in my car and that space is not anything to me other than the time it takes to get through that space to where I'm going. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Like, we're dislocated now, and we experience this dislocation and we feel it. We feel that somehow we're kind of missing something with all of the things that we have going on, with all the technology, with Facebook and social media and Netflix and all that kind of stuff. We feel like somehow we don't live the same kind of lives that we used to, and there's something that we miss even as we embrace the technology. Well, the reason for this, as the Bible relates this, is that we live lives in time and space. And the Bible kind of illustrates this in the way that there were 2 primary fundamental ways of living back then. And one was to live in time, and the other one was to live in space. And those people weren't the same people. Some people lived in time and some people lived in space, and they just weren't the same. And what you see in that is it's manifested in the nomad and the city dweller. The nomad is somebody who lived in time because their lives were controlled by time. If you were a nomad, you said, oh, what time of the year is it? Oh, well, then I need to go here. The place wasn't important. Time was. Is it fall? Is it winter? Is it summer? Is it spring? Well, then we need to be doing different things, and our lives are controlled by time. And so you didn't have the relationship with space, you had the relationship with time, and so you went through your life going, okay, it's time to move on. I don't care about this place anymore because the calendar tells me I need to stop caring about it and go to somewhere else. But then you had city dwellers who, their relationship with space, and they actually erected walls to protect that space. And it didn't matter what time of the year, that was kind of inconsequential to you, especially if you really are a city dweller and you're not a farmer at all. You're living in a city, and that city is walled, and your relationship is with that city, and you protect that city, and you live in that city, and that city protects you, and that space is really important. And it's really symbolized by the idea of a wall, because what a wall does is a wall prevents change. A wall is something that stands against time, right? Because here's the thing. Next year, what might happen? Well, the Mongols might invade. Well, let's say maybe longer than a year. Let's say in the next decade, the Mongols might invade. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to build a giant wall all across our country of China. Why? Because we need to keep the Mongols out. Why? Because if they come in, they're going to change everything. We don't want things to change. We want things to stay the same, so we're going to build a wall. And so there was these two ways of experiencing life, and one was to live in space, and the other one was to live in time. And they had different problems associated with that. If you were in a city, you stayed put no matter what, and you built up blessings because that was the nature of staying in space. That wall, once it was built, didn't need to be rebuilt, and so it was there, and you could move on. You could build a nicer house, you could build this, you could build that. If you were a nomad, you didn't have that luxury. Every time you moved, you started over again, and you were just constantly starting over again. But the problem is if you lived in the city, that could become stagnant. If you were the nomad, you had the problem of constantly not having built up any blessing. If you were in the city, you might build up blessing, but you had the problem of becoming stagnant. And you can even see this in modern times. How many of you guys have ever heard a story or seen a movie about a kid who comes from a small town where nothing ever changes? You ever seen that? Did you ever live that, maybe? What is the kid who lives in a town where nothing ever changes? What does he want to do? Get out, right? You want to get out. Why? Because nothing ever changes here. And so you want to get out. And you want to go to a place that's fast-paced, where things change, where there's excitement. Why? Because you're tired of being stagnant. And there's always somebody in the town warning them, oh, you better be careful. There's danger up there. And the problem is that if you go to that place where everything's always changing, the problem is you might not settle down, put down root, have something of value, be building something that lasts. So in the Bible, time devours space. And we live in a time where that is the way that we experience it. If you have to say, well, what are we? Are we city dwellers or are we nomads? I would say that most of the time we're nomads. We live in time and not in space. There's always a time that we're looking at. There's always a time to be careful of. And we measure everything in time. How long does it take to get here? How long does it take there? How long is it going to take me to do this? How long is it going to take me to do that? And we even have like YouTube now, because the thing is a 30-minute show. Who has time for that? But I can watch a 5-minute video. Or now we have TikTok, because who has time for a 5-minute video? Right? Because we live in time. We have constant attention to screens. And what even more, a bigger part of this is that the calendar now determines everything, including right and wrong. Have you ever heard anybody, like if you're a Christian, you believe in things that last, you believe in values that last, have you ever had somebody say to you or seen an interaction where they say, man, it's 2022, how can you believe that? Oh, so the calendar now determines what's right. That's very much somebody who lives in time. And when you live in time, nothing stays the same. But there's an aspect of place that defeats time. We talked about that a wall is about defeating that. And what's interesting is you have this tension in Scripture. In fact, remember that the Israelites had experienced kind of being nomads once again. Remember that they were nomads after they left Egypt, and they went to the Promised Land. But remember, when they were thrown out of the Promised Land, they ended up being nomads again. They had to go live in other places, and then they came back. And remember what was one of the important things that they were going to do when they came back. In Ezra chapter 4, starting in verse 12, it says, "Be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now be it known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired." So what's happening is this person is complaining that these Jews go back to Jerusalem, and the first thing they're going to do is build the wall. So we have these two problems, dislocation and stagnation. And most of us have a sense of dislocation more than we have stagnation. We have a sense of dislocation because there's no sense of place. We have a feeling that everything is up in the air. Everything has changed, not even just since our childhood, but in the last maybe 5 or 10 years. Everything has changed. Nothing lasts, and we lose our sense of not only place, but our sense of identity, because identity is dependent upon space. If everything changes, what am I? And we lose ourselves, and most of us have that. But we don't want to go into the other side of the coin. We don't want to experience the other problem of stagnation where nothing changes, where you're just yelling at the world, "Get off my lawn," right? And we don't know how to navigate this. We need a way of balance. Ecclesiastes, in chapter 3 that we just read, farther down in verses 14 and 15, it says, "I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before Him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away." It's an interesting way to summarize this. After going through a time for all these things, he's saying something really interesting and seemingly contradictory. Because if you see it, what he says is, that which is already has been. So he's saying that the thing that is eternal. That which is to be, that hasn't happened yet, already has been. Well, how could that be? It hasn't happened yet, but it already has been. What he's saying is that there's something interesting here, that God acts in the world, and yet God always remains the same. That the activity of God, even though God might be doing a new thing, that new thing might be new to us, but it's not really new because it's rooted in His character and His unchanging nature. And what we see, what this is hinting at in Ecclesiastes, there's actually a biblical way of reconciling these two problems. And it's an ancient problem, but it's also a modern problem. We experience this problem just as much as the ancients did, and there's a way of reconciling these two things so that our relationship with time is actually healthy. And the way to do that is actually our second point, walking with God. It's really interesting that with Adam and Eve, God made the world and He made them, and remember, He made a garden. And a garden, the word for garden there in Hebrew is a walled area. It's a walled garden. There's a wall around it. Things aren't going to change just willy-nilly all the time. There's a sense of place here. This is my place. This is my home. I am of this area. There's a sense of identity that comes from that. And that's where Adam and Eve live. They're put in a walled garden. But notice something interesting is that when God spends time with them, what are they doing? God doesn't come in, and it doesn't say that, God pulled up a chair, squeaked on the floor, pulled up a chair and sat down and had a few words with Adam and Eve. No, what did God do? It said that He walked with them in the cool of the day. It's interesting that you have two things going on at once. You have the idea of a walled garden, and you have the idea of walking with God. You have the idea of movement and change, and you also have the idea of permanence. And I think it's important to understand here that we have to reconcile ourselves to this idea of the way that time gets sorted out. Because if you don't do that, there's a very, very big problem ahead of you. What is the big problem? The big problem is, how do you know what to use your time on? That was Solomon's problem, right? Because, in the wisdom literature, he writes, well, everything's vanity. Like, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my time, and he goes through all these different options of, I can work, and I can study, and I can do all this kind of stuff. And at the end, he says, everything's vanity. I've wasted my time, and none of us wants to feel like that, but most of us feel like that almost all the time. Right? We have this sense that we don't have enough time, and we also have this sense day after day that we feel like our time is getting wasted. And the reason for that is because you can't just, the answer to being generous with your time is not just to say, well, here's a project that I will engage in. I'm not here to tell you, go spend every Saturday afternoon helping the homeless. I'm not here to tell you that. I'm not here to tell you that, take on this project or that good work. I'm not here to tell you that. Because the thing is, you don't know what you should be doing. Because there's a good chance that if you're living in time, that your time is going to be wasted. That's what happens. How many of you have ever felt like you have so much to do on a Saturday, and then the Saturday's over, and you feel like you wasted your time? Anybody? Am I the only one that ever felt like that? And even if you get a lot done, sometimes you look at it and go, oh, well, was that worthwhile? I don't know. How do you get over that? Well, Adam and Eve's job was to work and keep the garden, but it was also apparently walking with God. And those two things coincided with each other. Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day. And what's interesting is what you see is that God combines this idea of living in time and living with space all of the time. And the answer to figuring out the balance of that is to follow Him. Remember when God encountered Adam? Hey, Adam. When God encountered Abraham, remember, it was Abram at the time, but He encounters him, and what does He say? He says, go to what? A land I will show you. So He goes to Abraham and He says, Abraham, here's the deal. Your life is about to get upended, but there's actually a point to it. You should walk with me to the place that we're going. It involves two things. It involves a place, that's where we're headed, but it also involves being a little bit of a nomad. You have to follow me. Now here's the thing. You don't want to just be a nomad wandering around forever and ever. You want to have a place. But what place should you inhabit? Well, you got to follow God to get there. How is it that you're going to balance in your life time and place? How are you going to know what to do with your life? How are you going to be generous with your time? Spend all of your time walking with God. What is the generosity of your time that I'm calling you today? I'm calling you to walk with God. Walk with God. And if you spend your time walking with God, you're not going to be wasting your time. You're not going to feel constantly rushed. You're not going to feel like you don't have time for anything. You're not going to feel dislocated. You're not going to feel like you don't have a sense of identity. If you walk with God, it will sort out your problems of time and space. So God goes to Abraham and He says, go to a land I will show you. Not only that, but remember, He goes to Israel. And Israel's living in Egypt, and it's the wrong place. And God says, look, we're leaving here. We're getting out of here. You guys pack up, because you're not staying here. We're going. And remember, they had to wander through the wilderness. And remember, God says, I've got this great place that I'm going to take you. You follow me, you walk with me, I'm going to take you to this great place. And before they got there, they sent some spies. Do you remember the story? They sent some spies to the place where they were going. And the spies went. And how many went to spy on Canaan? And how many were bad and how many were good? We know the song, right? There you, thank you. 10 were bad and 2 were good. What did they see when they spied on Canaan? Come on. I'm the only person that knows this song? We're going to have to learn it, but not right now. So in Numbers 14:3, wow, that's really weird. I expected everybody to know that. I am so out of touch. Numbers 14:3. So what happens is that these spies go into the promised land, and 2 of them come back and say, oh, this is great. God's sending us to this great place. And 10 of them go, the people are huge. And if we go into that land, we're like grasshoppers among them, and they're going to kill us and destroy us and beat us up and be mean to us and put our heads in the toilet or whatever it is that they're going to do. They're really upset about this. And in Numbers 14:3, it says, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? That's what they say. Wouldn't it be better for us to just go back? This is terrible. And so they refuse to walk with God. And because they refuse to walk with God, they never get to place. They wander around for an entire generation. They are nomads for an entire generation. Here's the thing. If you don't walk with God, you will be a nomad and you will never have place. I want this to be clear. If you don't walk with God, you will wander around and never have place. Here's the thing. If you ask, what is right, what is morally right today in 2022, is it different than what was morally right in 2012, in 2002, in 1992, in 1982? If you ask the world, if you ask the culture, is what is right and wrong, is it different than what was considered right and wrong back then? The answer is yes, it's different. What it means to be a moral person today, according to the world, is completely different than what they said 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. It's different. And so if you end up going with the world, following the world, you will have no sense of place, because who you are supposed to be as a person will be constantly changing. It's one thing to have a stationary target and to constantly be moving toward hitting that target, or hitting the center of that target better. It's another thing to have a target that is constantly moving, and so what you did yesterday to be a good person has no relevance on what you are to do tomorrow to be a good person. You will be a nomad for your entire life if you do not trust God and walk with Him. Because the goal will be constantly shifting. And all your efforts, here's the thing, remember that when you are a nomad, one of the problems is that you don't carry over any blessings. And if you're a nomad, all of your efforts to become a good person yesterday will be completely irrelevant, because what it means to be a good person today is different. You see, if you're a Christian, you're getting what it means to be a good person, what it means to walk with God stays the same. And you're making some movement, but you're moving towards that center. And so the progress that you made yesterday applies to today. But if you don't follow God and you follow what the culture says, then everything goes out the window, because tomorrow, what it means to be a good person is different than it was today. You'll spend your life wandering just as that generation did, because they did not trust God. They had no faith. What do they spend their time doing? Look at Psalm 1. The first Psalm, 1 through 3. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. Your job is to walk with God. My job is to walk with God. If I walk with God in the cool of the day, I'm good. I'm good. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruit in season, and its leaf does not wither. He has place, and as the seasons change, the blessing stays. But look at the wicked. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Why are they like chaff? Because all of their efforts, they're gone. All of their efforts to be a good person are gone. I know of so many people that were following the counsel of the culture and oriented their lives around being a good person, only to have that get up and walk away. And now everything that they invested their life in is worthless. See, trusting in God and walking with Him means finding your place. It means finding the walled garden. You still move, but you move within an area that's protected. It has a place, it has identity and blessing, and it also has gates. There is some movement, there are some things that come in and out, but it doesn't completely transform. So now that we have this understanding of what it means to have the right relationship between time and place, between change and permanence, now we can talk about what it means to, number 3, do the work. So let's talk about doing the work. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, God gave mankind work to do. Now this is an interesting thing. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. This is the work that God has given man to do. The Lord God took man and put him in the garden of Eden to what? Work it and keep it. Work it and keep it. Those are interesting words, aren't they? God put Adam and Eve in the garden to work it and keep it. Work it and keep it. Do you see the connection here? Are our thinking caps on? Are the wheels moving? I know it's early in the morning. We've had our coffee though, right? The wheels are... Work it. When you're working something, do you change it? Yes, you change it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be working it. You'd be leaving it alone. And sometimes you're better off leaving things alone. But if God's called you to work it, then your job is to work it. And you work it. You work on it. You change it. You develop it. You make it grow. But what is keep it? Does that change? No, that's not change. Protect it. Keep it from changing. You work it and you keep it. Now you know everything is clear. Go off into your life and prosper. No, it's not clear, is it? It seems contradictory, doesn't it? It seems contradictory. I'm supposed to work it. I'm supposed to keep it. These things are contradictory to each other. How do I know what to do? Well, it depends, right? You learn which things to work and which things to keep by walking with God. And if you're not walking with God, you have no idea which things to work and keep. See, this is the thing. I'm not here to tell you to go do this or go do that. I'm here to tell you to walk with God. Be generous in your time walking with God. I'm not here to talk to you about being generous with your time at the church or at the homeless shelter or at, the Save the Squirrels Foundation or whatever it is. Whatever it is, I'm not here to tell you to spend your time there. I'm here to tell you, walk with God. Be generous in your time walking with God. Because if you're generous in your time walking with God, you will learn, you will come to know, come to understand what to work and what to keep. What things need to be developed, what things need to be changed, and what things need to be left alone, what things need to be protected, what things need to be kept from changing. Because what our culture does is it divides itself into two camps. And the two camps are change everything, and the other camp is don't change anything. And I'm here to tell you, those are both wrong. They're both wrong. Because we have a job to do, and that job is working and keeping. It's doing both. And you will only have the wisdom to do both if you walk with God. And so that's what we need to do. It's not about picking a cause or a person. It's not about putting more things on your calendar. It's not about doing any of those things. It's about knowing the times and what to do in the times. Why? Because you're walking with God. And as you're walking with God, you start to get an understanding of what He's doing in the world. You understand what His desires are, what His goals are, what His aims are, what He wants in the world. You start to get a notion of His character that forms the foundation of how He wants everything in the world to be. And you will not become stagnant, and you will not lose yourself. You see, so often as we get older, we experience this dislocation of time, and so we hunker down and we say, I'm not going to change anything. And that is a terrible place to be. It's a terrible place to be. But it's also terrible to completely lose yourself. And so don't do either one of those two things, but walk with God. Now, how do we apply this? Well, we have to first of all believe in God's glory. Meditate on God and start to come to understand, based on His character and nature, the glory of who He is, how the world is to be perfected. So here's the thing that's interesting, is the world goes out and it says, we need to change everything. Okay, to what? They can't tell you. We need to go out and change everything. To what? To something better. Well, what does better look like? I don't know. What is the goal that we're aiming for? What is the thing what is the greatest peace, the greatest thing, the highest good, the greatest glory? What does that look like? Well, we'll find out when we get there. Right now, we just need to change things. But see, that's not how you operate when you walk with God. When you're walking with God, you start to learn His character, His nature, who He is, what glory, what something being good actually means, because God is good. He forms the foundation, and He is the highest order of everything that is good and glorious. He is the aiming point. He is the thing that draws all things to Himself, and He is the culmination of all things. You will know what everything is supposed to be when you know who God is. You will know how things need to change. You will know what the word good means. And so you will have an aiming point for your actions that won't have to be undone tomorrow because you did it wrong. So believe in God's glory. Meditate on God, who He wants, or how He wants the world perfected. Belong to Him through the covenant. This is walking with Him in obedient relationship. What does it mean to walk with God? It means to practice obedience in all of the things that you know so far. I heard a guy talk about don't lie. And he said, I would tell you to tell the truth, but you don't know what the truth is, but you at least know when you're lying. And what he meant by that was this, is that we don't know fully what the truth is, but we often know when we're transgressing that into lie. We can't paint a perfect picture of all that truth encompasses, but we often know when we're fudging that, so just stop doing that. What he means is this, is that you don't know everything about what your life is supposed to look like. You don't know about everything that your children are supposed to look like, or your family, or your workplace, or your house, or you don't know any, but do you know some things? Well, then start doing those things. As you know God, as you think about your relationship with God, if we just bring in all this information, but it never manifests itself into obedience, then we never make any progress. Because what happens is through trying to implement what God wants, you start to learn things. How many of you guys have ever thought you knew something until you tried to do it? Has anybody ever had that experience? You think, oh, I know how to do this, and then you start trying to do it, and you have no clue. And what happens is, as you try to do it, you will learn things that you never would have learned if you just thought, oh, I know how to do that. That's the same thing with God, is you start to try to implement the things that you know about Him, and you start to learn more about Him through being obedient. Finally, become glorious by being transformed to His goal of glory. What I want to suggest is this, in this aspect of becoming glorious, being transformed, is we have, what we've talked about the last few weeks, we have a number of different aids for you to work through during the week that are based on the sermon that happens on Sunday. So tonight, this sermon recording will go up on our YouTube page. It'll go up on our Facebook page. There will be links there to our website, or you can just go to our website, fcct.org. And if you go to the sermons or messages, or I don't know, what's the name of it now? Because it just changed. What's that? Media. If you go to the media page, you will find a link to our study guides. And there is a daily devotional on there that's linked to the sermon and will help you work through. So this is just an introduction. The real meat and potatoes of what happens by going through that part of what we offer and daily working through on your own a scripture, some ideas, some questions about how to help you move your life forward. And we also have some videos on that. If we know that not everybody's into, reading written words down. And so we have some videos that are supplemental to that go on our Facebook page. There's 3 of those a week. But all of that is to help us in this idea of walking with God. Because I know as I say walk with God, it might be, well, what does that mean? Well, that material is there to help you, because it will help you to start walking with God. If you do that every day, there's 5 of those, 5 days a week, and then there's 3, the idea. You will learn what it means to walk with God. So anyway, walk with God.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to this church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.